Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me for some virtual vitamin Z as we bring the Detroit Zoo to you. My name is Claire and I'm a curator of education with the Detroit Zoological Society, where we are celebrating and saving wildlife. And today we're going to look at the design challenge that we started back on Monday to help our team who worked down in the Falkland Islands get their supplies off the island after a long day in the field and back down to their boat safely. So let's start in with a little bit of vocabulary, because we're going to talk a little bit about the science as to what made our designs and our models work. So let's check out those words first. Today we're going to talk about air resistance, we're going to talk about gravity, and we're going to talk about forces. So I'll use all of those in context and try to provide a little bit of background information as to why some forces work the way they do and how that all operates. But let's start with a refresher on what the project down in the Falkland Islands is all about. So we'll start with my trusty globe up here in Michigan, where the Detroit Zoo is. We're going to travel all the way down across South America, down to the tip where the Falkland Islands are, down near Antarctica. And the Detroit Zoological Society staff has been working with the Falkland Conservation Group to look at the Falkland Islands and the penguin populations that live on it to assess their health and well-being. And to do that, we first started by trying to figure out where the penguins were living, what species were there, and how many of them there are. So let's look at some pictures. This is the Falkland Islands. You can see it's pretty intense to try to climb up on that island and get to the top and actually study the seabirds. So we used a couple other strategies, especially when we were first starting, including drones. So drones are like little mini helicopters that you can launch off the boat up into the air, go above the island, and take a bunch of pictures that are really close up, and you can actually count the number of penguins from those pictures without having to try to scale that rocky cliff. So the Falkland Conservation Group let us know that they were seeing some penguins they felt might be ill, and they wanted us to start looking into what those reasons might be. So we designed a project looking at both Gentoo and Rockhopper penguins. So Gentoos and Rockhoppers are both species that live in our care at the Detroit Zoo, so we know a lot about them. We have a lot of expertise. And we developed this project, and we're going to compare populations of these penguins that live in an area that's really heavily trafficked by humans. So there's a lot of shipping, a lot of ecotourism, some oil industry, and then there's another population of penguins that doesn't have that. There's not many humans around, not much shipping, not much ecotourism. And they're going to assess the well-being of the penguins in each of those different populations. So to do that, they have to go down, our team has to go down to the Falkland Islands with a whole bunch of equipment. And they're going to find individual penguins and do health assessments by taking some blood samples and some feather samples and tagging them. And this is just like if you or I to go to the doctor and they were to take some blood and send it into the lab to see if we were doing well and our body was working well. It's the same concept, it's just with penguins. So they collect all these samples and they carefully tag them. And then they pack them up. They spend about 8 hours out in the field doing all of this, so it's a really long day. And once they pack them up, they have to get them off of that island and back down to the boat. So this is where we were going to help them with our design challenge, because once they get back down to the boat, they still have to process all these samples, so they're going to be safe to ship back to the United States so we can look at them in the lab. So it's a lot of work. So anything that we can do to help their team, I thought, let's do it. So I posed you all with a design challenge. Now, while we don't have the exact equipment that they do, we're going to make a model and design ours off of this model. So instead of a box full of samples of penguin feathers and blood, we're just going to use 4/4 for our model. And if you threw that box off the side of the island and down to the boat, it would travel down at such a speed that when it hit the boat's deck, everything inside would probably be ruined. So we need to think of a way that we could throw that box off the side of the island and slow it down, so by the time it got to the deck of the boat, everything inside would be safe and our team would not have to carry all of those materials down. So I proposed a design challenge, and let's look at what that challenge was. You're going to find materials around your house. You're going to use your design model box, which is your 4/4 or a metal teaspoon if you didn't have 4/4 available to you. You needed a tape measure and a stopwatch. And the first step is you needed to know how long does it take for those 4/4 to fall 4 foot. So I timed this, and it was actually really interesting because when I timed these on Monday, I was holding the quarters in one hand and the stopwatch in the other and dropping and timing at the same thing, and I came up with about an average of 0.5 seconds. But when I timed it from this video, my average is actually closer to 0.35 seconds. So you can see, here I am, here's my quarters, I'm going to drop it, 4 foot, and you can hear it hit the ground right there at the bottom. So I timed that, and my objective was to slow those quarters down, just like I'd want to slow that box down before it went off the side of the island. So the next step was to think about all the different factors that come into when you drop something. So there's the mass of it, there's the weight, which is actually the gravity pulling down on that object, and then there's the air resistance that's pushing back up on it. So let's talk a little bit about some of that different concepts. So my quarters have a mass to them, and when they're sitting on the table or on my hand, there's a couple forces at play here. There's gravity, which is pulling it down. Gravity wants to pull everything down to the surface of the earth. And there's also the structure of my hand, which is pushing up on these quarters and keeping them where they are. That's why I'm sitting in my seat right now and the chair is holding me up, the structure of it is. But if gravity got a hold of me, they'd pull me down if that chair were to break. So we need to think about now when we drop it. When I drop something, it's going to spend some time accelerating because the gravity is pulling it down towards the earth. And it gets to a point when it can't speed up any farther because the gravity is this constant force, and then it reaches what's called a terminal velocity, which is a really fancy word for a constant speed. And then eventually it'll hit the ground. Now, some things spend a lot of time accelerating on the way down, and other things don't spend as much time. So if I were to drop this sheet of paper, gravity's pulling. There's a couple things also at play here. This has a lot more surface area than this does. So while gravity is going to pull this down and air resistance is going to push up a little bit, there's a lot more air resistance that's pushing up on this paper and causing it to fall a little bit slower. So we tested a bunch of materials earlier in the week, tissues, plastic bags. We spent a lot of time dropping things. And what I settled on, it was that a plastic bag like this took some time to fall. So I was going to start with my designs for my parachutes with that plastic bag. All right, so here's some of my different trials. This one is just a plastic bag. I took the 4 quarters, I put them between the 2 handles and I taped them up, and then I dropped it from a height of 4 foot. So this one, you see it drop here in just a second. This one took about 0.58 seconds to drop down. So it was significantly longer than my initial trial at 0.3 seconds, but not long enough. I wanted to see if I could design another solution that might take even longer. So I fashioned a big circle out of pipe cleaners to increase the amount of air resistance. So I thought if I could hold that bag open, I might have a little bit more air resistance to slow that package down as it continued to drop to the ground. So here's this one, here's this trial. This is with the bag opened up a little bit with a structure inside of it. And when I timed it, it actually took almost exactly the same amount of time as just the bag. So I thought, all right, well, what else could I do? I rummaged around the house a little bit to see if I could find anything else, and I came across a really huge shopping bag. And I thought, well, let's try this one. This one was a little bit unwieldy to get started, so it took both hands, but I dropped it from that height of 4 foot. And it took almost exactly 0.6 seconds, which is almost double my original dropping of the 4 quarters. So I was super excited about that, and I felt like this was a pretty good spot to stop with my designing. So I'm really excited to share with you that several other folks got in on this design challenge and made their own parachutes, and let's check out some of them. So this one was submitted by The Pack. They went as far as to make a whole video about their design challenge, including a starry background and fading in and out text, which is pretty amazing. So this is them dropping a teaspoon. They used a teaspoon instead of quarters, and they tried it 3 different times. And then at the end of this, they're going to add up all 3 of those times, divide it by 3 for an average. So on average, their teaspoon took 0.7 seconds to fall. So now they're going to try to increase that amount of time and get it to slow down. They also tried a plastic garbage bag like I did. And their first trial was 0.6 seconds. The next was 0.9 seconds. And then their third trial was 0.9 seconds. So when you average those out, their plastic bag increased the amount of time it took for the teaspoon to fall to 0.8 seconds. So that's a win. Here's their next design, which I thought was really cool. They taped the teaspoon onto the bottom of a clipboard, again, increasing that air resistance, then dropping it. So their trials were 0.8, 0.8, and I wonder if you can guess what trial 3 is going to be. 0.8, so very consistent. So 0.8 seconds. So you did an amazing job, The Pack, on your awesome parachute designs, and thank you for spending all that time to create an incredible video to explain your whole process. This one was the Penguin Plunge team. They also used a teaspoon, and they used a bag on top and dropped it down. Then they tried adding extra bags on the outside of it to slow it down even more. And ultimately they decided they couldn't slow down that pack of supplies well enough. And remember that teaspoon or quarters is actually representing a box full of samples from the field, from the penguins in the Falklands. So instead they wanted to protect it by the parachutes, and they wrapped it up in a whole bunch of bubble wrap so when it hit the deck of the boat it would still be safe. So creative solutions from Penguin Plunge team. Mackenzie sent me a really nice note with their email, talking about how they've been coming to the zoo since they were kids, how much they love penguins, and they want to make sure that penguins are around for many, many generations to come. And Mackenzie, thank you for that sweet note. I really enjoyed reading through it. This is Mackenzie's design. This was based on, again, a bunch of trials of different materials from around the house. They started by dropping the quarters at 0.6 seconds, and then it built up all these different materials to the plastic shopping bag, which took 2 seconds to drop that 4 foot. So they decided to use that in their design. And this is a picture of their parachute taped to a door so you can see the amazing apparatus that was built. So it's a parachute attached to a styrofoam bowl that you can actually put the mass or the weight inside of. So without the weight, that whole parachute apparatus took about a second to fall from 4 foot. And when you drop those quarters inside, it took about 0.84 seconds. So Mackenzie was also successful in increasing the amount of time for those objects to fall. Then Mackenzie took it a step further and made a great visual to analyze her data. And you can see the quarters down on the bottom is taking the shortest amount of time to fall, all the way up to the bag on the other side that took the longest time. So great use of data visualization. I'm so impressed. Mackenzie, thank you for taking the time to design that parachute, and thank you again for that really nice note about penguin conservation. I'm here to promise you that we're working really hard to do just that, and making sure those penguins are here for generations and generations to come. So we talked a lot today, and you may or may not have realized it, but all of those things that came into play with the parachute are physics. And these are important physics concepts that students and adults alike need to understand. We need to understand how long it takes something to fall off and what forces are there playing. So the normal force that's pushing us up, the gravitational force that's pulling us down, and how do all those things interact in the world. And you can bet that someone who's jumping out of a plane wants to make sure that a person who designed their parachute knew all about those forces. So we learned about forces. We learned about physics. We had some persistence in there as we kept trying different editions of things until we found the right solution. And we had some problem solving, working through all those different problems that came up and seeing different ways that we could work through them. All are really important skills that you need, especially if you're going into a field like engineering, research, or conservation. So thank you again for everybody who made a parachute and submitted it. I love seeing the submissions, and I had a lot of fun building my parachutes, and I hope you did too. So thanks again for helping our Falkland Conservation team and helping them get their supplies off the island down to the boat safely so we can help protect penguins. If you tune back in today at 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock, my colleagues Sandy and Zara will be here sharing more information about the Detroit Zoo and the animals in our care and all the amazing work that we're doing around the world to help protect those animals. And for all those moms out there, I wish you a very happy Mother's Day weekend. So until we meet again next week, stay safe and take care of each other.